All right. So if anyone doesn't know what I do here, I read philosophy and we review it live on stream. We try to figure out what's going on in the philosophy and why did someone spend all the time and effort to get something published. Yeah. And so is what we do. This is called Can't Kill the Vibe Against Hope in Aesthetic Discourse by Nick Riggle, and it's forthcoming in the Mind Journal. I've tried to get things into Mind. They don't like me, apparently, but it's one of the very tippity-top philosophy journals, and so it's not surprising. They reject most things. Yeah. So, here we go, and as always, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. I mean, I reserve the right to just, like, blow through this if I'm getting tired and it's going too long. And I apologize, I am coughing. But at the end, we also review the paper. We have an emote review, so if you stick around to the end, you are free to review the paper. David Lynch's Blue Velvet already in the beginning. This looks interesting. Yeah. So this author is a somewhat famous person. He used to be a professional inline rollerblade star. Like he was in the X Games. So he was in the X Games and then he went to school for philosophy and now he's a professional philosopher. So he was like an X Games guy. He's an esthetician and he's generally well liked. Like I've read some of his stuff. It's good. So yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't know this Mike and Emily. Yeah, he sounds interesting. He is. I saw him talk once here in New York. And I know our buddy Aris went and saw him talk at some aesthetics conference too. I think he met him. Okay, introduction. The film critic duo Siskel and Ebert often disagreed. In their contentious review of David Lynch's Blue Velvet, they circled around the thought that Lynch wants to play his audience like a piano, manipulating their emotions by eliciting and subverting their expectations for the film genre of comedy and thriller. Ebert wraps up his critique: if Lynch wants to play me like a piano, he better get some music worth listening to, but Siskel gets the last word. I think this is a good song. He was a skater boy. He said, see you later, skater boy. Yeah, that too. Dojo says, I love that Kaylee's shows. Oh, okay, you guys are talking your math again. I don't know what that is. Is this a successful aesthetic conversation? Many philosophers would say be committed to saying no, because they are committed to the thought that aesthetic discourse is state-oriented or aimed at achieving some state of agreement. But while Siskel and Ebert agree on some things, Lynch is a talented director, they do not arrive at a shared aesthetic belief about the aesthetic value of the film, and they disagree about the aesthetic character and value of various aspects of the film. They do not converge, nor do they seem to care to, focusing instead on expressing and refining their own views by bouncing them off each other. But the presupposition that they ought to converge is often thought to be a constitutive feature of aesthetic conversation, of evaluative conversation in general, or simply of conversation. Many philosophers are committed to convergence. Quote, when we speak with each other about aesthetic value, we presuppose that there is a unique normative standard on which our attitudes ought to converge. Yeah, I mean, just like from a stand-back point of view, we tend to act like there is objective standards to beauty, and that's what Riggle is alluding to here. He knows all of this, and so it's like in the background is the idea that there are things that are beautiful that we all agree to. I know we've discussed this on this stream and other streams, like and we have people in the community that have very strong feelings about this, because like I brought up the idea that like a lot of people think like, you know, sunsets are beautiful, and one of the community members here does not find sunsets beautiful. So it's like even among just the Twitch chat, there are disagreements about what things might be considered objectively beautiful. Okay. Siskel and Ebert seem unconcerned about converging on the merits of Blue Velvet and many other films, and so they failed many times over in their attempt to have a successful aesthetic conversation. This reminds me that I'm halfway finished on Burke's on The Sublime and Beautiful. Yep. Dojo said, ought to, should. I wonder if we need some sort of philosophical tag when these terms are used. If you have any question about how something's used, let me know. A lot of times, you know, they're just being used in the everyday sense. If they're not, it's worth pointing out. You like the Darwinian theory of beauty? What's that? I don't even, like, I mean, what would that be? I mean, I have an idea of what you could mean, but like, if you feel like explaining, Vipers, go right ahead. In Riggle's paper, Convergence, Community, and Force in Aesthetic Discourse, Riggle argues that aesthetic conversation is much richer and more varied than convergence allows. There are many aesthetic conversations that are successful, even if we do not presuppose that our attitudes ought to converge on a unique standard. Instead, I argue that we should think aesthetic conversation is governed by the value of engaging in aesthetic community. Yeah, so this is completely different. It's like the idea of being talking about aesthetics is to be part of the conversation, not to be getting at an objective standard. It's just participation is what makes the aesthetics interesting. You'll distract from the paper too much, but you're post TED Talk in the Discord. Okay, there you go. Megalomorph says, okay, that's math stuff I don't know about. So aesthetic discourse is governed by the following community norm. Community. Quote, when we speak with each other about aesthetic value, we presuppose that we ought to achieve a state of mutual valuing of individuality. Okay, end quote. Okay, please help. What does ought to mean here? Is that generally what is a philosopher hopes the end result will be. Okay, so there are ideas that things are normative. Normative means that there are ways things should be. I mean, I know I'm reusing it. So there are end states that are the goal. And that is how things ought to be, that is the goal end state. So we intend to get certain results. And that's how it ought to be. So the idea that I don't know where the ought, so when you say there's a unique normative standards on which our attitudes ought to converge, that means there is an answer to the question. Is it beautiful or is it not? Is it aesthetically valuable or is it not? And the idea that it ought to converge there is that there is a unique answer to the question that we should be trying to find in this case. From whose perspective is the goal or end state or the state of the goal? Objective in the world. It's a view from nowhere. It's a view from objective reality. This is not a view from any particular person, and you can see that Riggle is already pushing back on this. So down here where Riggle says it's that we achieve a state of mutual valuing of individuality. There is no one right or wrong answer in the world, a view from nowhere. Riggle is saying we want to achieve a state of mutual valuing of individuality, that we are ourselves and the end in ourselves. We ourselves are an aesthetic end state, a goal, what we like best. Raymond says this is like the dialogue of Lucian, where Zeus says that the gods should be grouped from the most beautiful and good to the least beautiful and good, with those made of gold and marble first, and then those made of bronze, stone, and woods, except for the Colossus of Rhodes, for the Colossus argues that gold gives beauty because of its value, and he with all his bronze is worth more than the gods of all gold. Dojo says all men are created equal. All men are created differently. There is a standard that we are all created from. That doesn't mean there aren't differences between us. And so we will all have different, you're allowed to have your own aesthetic choice. You're allowed to have your own aesthetic opinion. You might like chocolate more than you like other people like vanilla. Someone might like vanilla more than like chocolate. That is okay, because you are all equally human, but you're still allowed to have aesthetic choices between them. So, yeah. Is that a normative end state or goal? That's more of an ethical one. Aesthetically valuable, bong and stuff, yeah. So all men are created equal is more of a value of humanity than it is a normative end state. So it's a way of saying objectively in reality all humans have value. And that's a sort of a standard we try to hold ourselves to. We don't be like, okay, those people suck and they can die. That's a shitty thing. So we like to say all men are created equal, or all humans, all they, thems, I don't give a fuck. Everyone that is human is of equal value, or not of equal value, has at least standard humanity, and that should be taken seriously. That would be normative, yeah. But that's also sort of objective stuff. So you don't have individual opinions on whether all people are human, have value. You're supposed to have at least a minimum understanding of that. And of course, I think some people suck and those people have less value, but you should start off with valuing all humanity. Give everyone at least a standard there. Just because everyone's human doesn't mean some people are absolute shit and don't deserve what they have. Yeah. Megalomorph says we all may be created equal, but we don't all do the same things with it. Some people's actions remove their value. Yeah. So it's like some people are terrible, and we should say, oh, they have human value. Yeah, but like they're shitty human beings, and everyone else should be above them, and some of those people should, be thrown in jail or whatever, or just like something to them. Dogan says we were just talking about cognitive dissonance at church today, so I'm having trouble with ought to. Yeah. Well, it depends what they were saying in church. I mean, they may have been saying something smart, but a lot of the moral oughts are not the same as the aesthetic oughts. So moral oughts are objective. So if you have a religious doctrine, the doctrine is giving you how things are set out to be. That is the end state. The word of God is what is morally correct in those systems. So that is an objective thing, but it's given by God or given by the religious authority, whatever that happens to be. So that is a different kind of ought because that is objective according to that creed. The oughts here are going to be more varied because they're aesthetic, and different people can view different works of art differently. So that's exactly the question. What's at hand? Okay. The goal of aesthetic conversation, continuing. The goal of aesthetic conversation is to achieve aesthetic community in which the interlocutors express their individuality. So everyone gets their own sorts of uniqueness. This is one of my technical terms to each other in a way that promotes the social exercise of distinctive aesthetic capacities. I gloss this as vibing, a process of mutually engaged activity that Siskel and Ebert seem to have mastered. So everyone has a way of viewing the aesthetic world, and that is called their vibe under Nick Riggle's scheme. Zenomox says, as an occasional non-cognitivist, I have a lot of trouble with ought to as well. Yeah. I mean, again, so if you're a non-cognitivist, you think like, okay, there isn't, like cognitivists generally are saying there is a way, a state in your mind that can be like given propositionally that describes it. And that's like, there's an objective thing that's right or wrong there. And if you're not going to take that, you're going to say, well, certain things are emotional, then like there is no ought to, it's just your reaction. Raymond says aesthetic judgments would be those made on the feeling generated by a representation without taking into account the objective characteristics of an object. It is not a teleological judgment. Yeah, so this is, again, we're getting different ways of expressing what's going on in this paper. A teleology being some sort of like overarching structure to how things should go. Yeah. Well, I don't think that's a burn actually, but like this is part of the, maybe it is. Things are going over my head today. It happens. Okay. So, in reflection on the 10th anniversary of Siskel's passing, Ebert wrote about how well they vibed. Oh shit, you're right. Sorry, I forgot to do that. I will get you the link. And what's up, Tindarius? How you doing? Thank you for reminding me how to stream on my own stream. I need to do that little up command. It sets off a number of commands in the background for the bot. So, yeah. So now the paper should work. And so yeah, if anyone wants to get the paper, you can type in !paper and the bot auto post the link. Yeah. So yeah, UP is update paper. What it stands for. Okay, so Ebert wrote about how well they vibed. Gene Siskel and I were like tuning forks, striking one and the other would pick up the same frequency. When we were in a group together, we were always intensely aware of one another. Sometimes this took the form of camaraderie, sometimes shared opinions, sometimes hostility, but we were aware. Yeah, so it's a, good working relationship there. Community captures the sense that Siskel and Ebert's conversations about Blue Velvet is a success. What is community? Well, I guess that's the definition. So many of their conversations were like that. They do not presuppose that they ought to agree. They fail to reach agreement, and they are practiced at not caring much about that. Yeah, that's this up here. So you like that you bounce ideas off each other, and it helps you to explain your own positions. Ateleology. I don't think I used ateleology. I meant a space teleology is. That may also a teleology may be a word, but no, I meant a teleology is a structure of how things are supposed to be going. So a teleological account is like talking about an end state that we're going to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in a recent article for this journal, Hansen and Adams argue that community is not the only norm that can capture conversation like Siskel and Ebert's and avoid the faults of convergence. They agree that convergence fails, but they seek to retain its spirit by drawing on the work of Stanley Cavell, who they see as claiming that the hope of convergence is what matters for aesthetic conversation, even if the object of that hope never materializes. In place of community, they offer hope. So this is aesthetic hope. When we speak with each other about the aesthetic value of an object, we hope that our attitudes about the objects will converge. No, that's just wrong. I'm with Riggle on this. This is stupid. I mean, I like it when people agree with me, but they definitely don't have to agree with me. Like, other people can like things that I dislike. Like, I know a lot of people in the community like metal music. I have no feeling whatsoever for metal music. It's just like, it doesn't do anything for me. I am perfectly happy with everyone else liking metal music. It just doesn't do anything at all for me. Yeah. So non-cognitive revolves around the truthiness of ethical statements. Yeah, whether they represent a proposition that is true about something in the world. Non-cognitive perspective is that moral statements are in propositions. Yeah, so it's like when you say murder is wrong, that sounds like a true or false statement, but what the non-cognitivists mean when they say they're non-cognitivist about murder is wrong is you're basically saying like, bleh, bad murder, boo. And so it's like more like a boo. And so it's like we're just giving it the thumbs down, like bad. So it's like, yeah. You've been watching in the past again because of some bug? Okay. I'm sorry about Twitch. Yeah. I'm doing good. I'm okay. I'm still getting over this stupid cough. I have a sinus infection. I feel basically fine, but I wake up coughing at night, which ruins my sleep, and I don't do well on low sleep. Yeah, so there you go. Raymond says, I like Kant's explanation of the judgment of art within his table of higher faculties of the soul. Within the total faculties of the spirit, the judgment that would apply to art would be between the feeling of pleasure and pain, but again, applied. Yeah. So, yeah, Kant had his sublime and other things. And so it's like you have to, it's cool stuff. Peach T says, what if we agree that there's some objective property of music and then some individuals have relations to these forms of music? Yeah, so, I mean, what do you mean by objective property there? Like, I mean, there are certain tones, there are certain, like, scales. Of course, people, like, know this stuff. But if a certain piece of music is beautiful or is a good work of art, that's going to, people are going to disagree. At least I'm not coughing blood, could be worse. Yeah, I'm coughing up phlegm. Like, it's really annoying. And it's like really small amounts of phlegm. So it's not even like I feel terrible, but like I end up coughing because I just get like a little bit of phlegm in my throat. And it's like, why? But anyway. Okay. When we hope that our attitude, back to the paper. Let me get somewhere in this paper. When we hope that our attitudes will converge, we do not merely express our own aesthetic beliefs. We try to find common ground. We clarify our aesthetic claims. And when challenged, we engage in worthwhile practices of giving and asking for reasons, defending our claims, critiquing each other, and so on. Yeah, chunky, exactly. Doja says, well, shit, I'm a non-cognitivist and I didn't even know what that was. Yeah, it's a legit position and not everyone realizes it, Doja. You think you're more of a situationalist where you have to weigh many variables, determine moral statements, and complex enough that we can disagree not even on truthiness. Yeah, so that would be, non-moral statements, yeah. Moral situations. Yeah, so there's good reasons for being non-cognitivist, too. So it's like, yeah. Okay. In this way, Hansen and Adams agree with Riggle that the aesthetic discourse is process-oriented, its value lies in certain processes of discursive engagement rather than any particular end state, for example, of agreement. But they think that the relevant process is not that of engaging in the aesthetic community. They argue that hope evades my criticism of convergence and that against community. Quote, there are vibing conversations that do not go beyond expression of personal preference, and that there are acrimonious aesthetic arguments that community rules out, but are still worth having. End quote. Their worry is that if community sanctions conversations that are a little more than exchanges of preference, then it does not adequately support the important activities involved in hoping to share attitudes. And if community's emphasis on vibing steers conversations too acutely towards amicability, then it cannot sanction grittier, more heated, or acrimonious exchanges that could be sanctioned by the hope of sharing attitudes. Yeah, so this is just relativism. That's all we're doing. We're doing relativism in aesthetics. If we were all just expressing what we like, then everything is relative, and then there's no reason why someone's wrong. So, yeah, so people can still be wrong, but that doesn't mean we can't disagree. So Riggle's going to have to say that, basically, that people can still have their own preferences, but you can still be objectively wrong. Peach T says, what if some collections of individuals do indeed agree with some opinionated structure of the genre, but see their differences as merely their own different valuations of the genre, but still come to some unanimous agreement? I suspect that's where we're going, where there's going to be objective things that claims we can make, but then everyone may have different nuance about it. Here, Riggle argues that Hansen and Adams' critique of community is unconvincing, but seeing why unearths a deep source of disagreement about how to think about the rationality and general structure of aesthetic discourse. I argue that they do not succeed in showing that community allows mere exchanges of preference and that hope and community are on par when it comes to acrimonious aesthetic exchanges. In developing this response, I will highlight several reasons to be hopeless and show how we can understand the rationality of aesthetic discursive practices and of aesthetic life more generally without centering the serious forms of discursive engagement that Hansen and Adams emphasize. Raymond says we must also be careful that aesthetics does not always go to art. We find nature beautiful. Yep. There is no transcendental taste in art outside of what can be experienced, but the aesthetic judgment and the sublime taste or experience that we feel is what we could call transcendental. But if we were asked to describe it, we could not. Yeah, so if we want to get into the weeds about these definitions and what our experiences are like, that's hard. So it's like, yeah, that's right. There's a phenomenology of art, what it's like to experience this stuff. And so like, this goes back to the Kantian transcendental, what that experience is. Yeah, so it gets complicated, but like, yes. I am hoping I'm going to get through this paper. I do not know if I will be able to. Hoping and converging. In Riggle 22a, I argue that aesthetic conversations are constitutively governed by community and aim at the mutual valuing of individuality. So this is like, you can see, relativism. Mutually valuing individuality, meaning everyone has their own value relative to their individuals, the individual selves. But to understand this view, we have to spell out my technical definition of individuality. A person's individuality is constituted by their exercise of a capacity I call discretionary valuing. Okay. This is the capacity to decide what and how to value. Much of our valuing is compulsory. Valuing love and disvaluing murder are not optional. Yeah, see, exactly. So here we go. Now we're getting the objective things you are not allowed to disagree on. And so there'll be things that you're allowed to disagree on and things you're not allowed to disagree on. And this is how Riggle is going to try to, split the line or split the baby or whatever. I'm starting to lose it. But we can choose to spend our time engaging with burly motorcycles over cute VW Beetles, hip-hop over punk, Schubert over Brahms. In doing so, we develop our capacity for discretionary valuing, deciding what to pay attention to, how to attend to or interpret it, what to revisit, how to listen, see, or aesthetically act. While other practices might promote or permit discretionary valuing, aesthetic valuing centers and celebrates its exercise. A person's individuality is constituted in part by the way they exercise their discretionary valuing capacity. And so individuality is expressed not merely and sometimes not at all by expressing what one likes and dislikes, where liking and disliking are broad enough to include trivial preferences and innate dispositions, but primarily in how one exercises this capacity for engaged valuing. One may like or prefer something without loving or valuing it. I like but do not love cucumbers, and I would not be very bothered if my attitude changed to indifferent or dislike. I would be unhappy if I started disliking cucumbers. Cucumbers are great. Many of our preferences change without mention, and one may value something toward which they have no natural preference, learning to value it through repeated engagement and effort. I mean, that's fair. You can learn to like something. Aesthetic, yeah, there's a learning curve. Like, so you might not understand sports, but then if you end up having to play a sport, like as a community activity, you might learn to like baseball, for instance. Okay, aesthetic conversations are opportunities to exercise and express this capacity in a mutually supportive way, and such conversations are successful when this kind of mutual support is carried off. You've brainwashed yourself into liking things several times, Peach T. Yeah, this is what happens. I mean, this is part of, like, parents do this for kids. They have to get the kids involved in stuff before the kid, takes it up. The kid has to be forced into having fun sometimes. Zenimax says, I try to like as much as I can. Life is easier when you enjoy it. Yeah. So you shouldn't be bitter. Don't be a sourpuss for no other reason than just being bitter and a sourpuss. That's not helpful. There's a lot of smart people that do a lot of different stuff, and you don't realize the good stuff till you get into an area. It's very easy to see all the crap because there's always a ton of crap. But then once you realize you're in an area, you can get in, you see the good stuff. You're like, hey, that's actually cool stuff. There was some smart person doing cool stuff in this area. So it's this is part of the problem. Raymond says, let's see what Thomas De Quincey says. Murder is an art that has been perfected since Cain. Murder can be the object of aesthetic pleasure. Murder can purify the heart through compassion and terror. For the murderer must enjoy and delight in homicide as if it were a spectacle. Must be art. Yeah, so there are differing views on this. I mean, there's that show Dexter where people, it makes a science of how to kill people or whatever. So the question is the actual murder the value thing there, or is it the whole planning and psycho development of how to bring the whole thing about? Any human activity is going to have an aesthetic dimension to it. You have to wonder if murder is actually bringing anything to the table at that point other than just being terrible, or a unique, being unique is not good in itself. Murder as a unique thing to be doing, it doesn't make it aesthetically valuable. Yeah, we only see medieval art full of gore. That's true, but then again, did they just like drawing it, or how often did they do it? I know they had medieval torture devices. Is there aesthetic value in that? It's hard to say. Hello, Pepe. What's up? Hi, Ragioni. I don't know what Ragioni is. But yeah. So, I mean, of course people have, dark fantasies. That's fine. The question is, what value are you getting out of that? Is it some sort of, hedonistic, just you're getting a pleasure out of, watching something else suffer, and then you're well, I'm not suffering, so I feel better? Or do you actually, in some psycho way, enjoy the pain of others? That would be a little disturbing, but I understand that it might be a thing. I mean, I remember watching Con Air, and was pleasure actually is painful for this guy. You really start seeing the gore and Renaissance and early modern period art. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so there is a question there that if aesthetics is really separate from morals, then there might be an aesthetics to murder that you have to separate out from the morality of it. Yeah, Goya, exactly. That's true. We can also see as a defanged noumena, where the noumena in such cases would be mortality. Yeah. So, yeah. So Francisco de Goya's art, some fucked up shit. We've had that forever. So yes. But is that actually murder, or are we painting stuff? Painting is not murder. Okay. Back to the paper. Riggle's argument against convergence in brief is this. 1. Aesthetic community exists when and only when, and because agents vibe, that is, mutually support and the expression and development of their capacities for discretionary valuing and volitional openness. 2. There are many aesthetic conversations that are good in virtue of their promoting or constituting aesthetic community. 3. Presupposing that we ought to converge on a shared standard is not necessary for aesthetic community. 4. Convergence says that aesthetic conversations are good if and only if the interlocutors presuppose that they ought to converge on a shared standard. 5. Therefore, convergence is false. Yeah. So if every, I guess the idea is that we we might believe, given hope, that we will come to a consensus eventually, and that doesn't really matter. Riggle says, just drop that sense of like that we're gonna eventually end up in a end state that we all want to agree to. That's not true. Okay. So 1 gives a definition of aesthetic community. 2 asserts that there are aesthetic conversations that are good in virtue of how they promote aesthetic community. 3 asserts that presupposing the existence of a standard on which we ought to agree is not necessary for aesthetic community. And 4 states that convergence requires aesthetic interlocutors to make such a supposition. Hansen and Adams largely accept this argument. Perhaps they would quibble with 1. However, they argue that a slight modification of 4 is also true, and thus so is a slight modification of convergence that competes favorably with community. They thus locate a middle position between community and convergence expressed by hope. Raymond says we should differentiate between a common aesthetic in a flower or a landscape or a person, and for example a book, where you obviously have to know how to read and enjoy it, or an aesthetic that is forged with tradition and practice that becomes art. I'm not so sure. I mean, yes, there is a learning curve on a lot of stuff. And I know that's like the common aesthetic is the one that like just hits you, that you think you can just get. But again, like, not everyone agrees on the common aesthetic. So, like I said earlier, a community member said that they don't like sunsets. So there is no common aesthetic between them and the sunset enjoyers. So now if you're talking about like an art that is expressing some sort of new thought in terms of aesthetics, okay, but like it's hard to say that is so different. Like, what is the common aesthetic that is so different from? I'm not sure. Okay. Continuing, what is the difference between hope and convergence? The primary way that Hansen and Adams distinguish them is as follows, quote, Riggle assumes that advocates of a convergence norm are committed to the idea that interlocutor sensibilities are fixed in advance of the developing conversation, whereas we think that one of the things a rewarding conversation about art can do is reveal that your ability to appreciate the artwork isn't immutable, and the conversation itself can be a means by which one comes to be able to acquire that ability. End quote. Riggle cannot tell why they think it is reasonable to attribute this assumption to him. I never state this restriction, and the convergence norm itself does not presuppose that the relevant standard already exists in one or the other of the interlocutors. Furthermore, none of my criticisms of convergence depend on the thought that it does. Convergence is still satisfied when the standard that the interlocutors suppose they ought to converge on is one neither had previously. Furthermore, exchanging our aesthetic views during an aesthetic conversation is such a common feature of aesthetic discourse that I would count it as one of the more obvious ones that any theory of aesthetic discourse must account for. Given that this is so common, it is strange to read a caveat against it into convergence. Yeah, so he's just being like, you motherfuckers, you straw banned me. You made up some ridiculous result and attributed it to me, and it's like, I would never make such a claim. Alright, so Riggle continues. So how exactly is hope any different from convergence? Presupposing the existence of a standard on which interlocutors ought to agree is not very different from hoping for agreement, since the presupposition is the very thing hope requires. Hope requires the possibility of agreement, and agreement is possible if and only if there is some standard to agree upon. Yeah, so hope basically is just kicking the can down the road, but it's still like you're hoping you're going to get there, even if you don't think that you're going to agree that day. Caravaggio may be a better example. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of what's that triptych. What the fuck is it? Oh, yeah, see, I lose recall when I'm streaming. Like word recall and stuff. In the Garden of Earthly Delights. So you've got that, like, you know, the site of like the hell, and it's like, yeah, all that stuff, like all these like people doing terrible things. I mean, that's what I'm thinking of at the moment. Of course, Goya had some weird shit too going on. Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch. Thank you, T. Yeah. Okay, as stated, hope does not require the presupposition of a normative standard. It simply calls for shared attitudes. However, merely sharing attitudes cannot be what hope demands. Suppose that after a long and passionate conversation, we come to agree that Warhol's Brillo boxes are wickedly scary. Our attitudes about Brillo boxes align, but have we had a successful aesthetic conversation. It seems not, since our judgments and feelings are unhinged, divorced from standards that ought to guide us. Indeed, I am pretty sure that Hanson Adams would rule out this conversation as not serious in the sense I discussed below. If there is another relevant difference between hope and convergence, then I am not sure what it is. So I'm left somewhat puzzled about the distinction between hope and convergence. Yeah. Okay, aesthetic acrimony. Still, Hanson and Adams argue that hope is preferable to community on the grounds that community rules out acrimony's aesthetic conversations and sanctions mere exchanges of preference. They argue that, quote, there are lots of examples of non-defective aesthetic claims that don't involve vibing, end quote. If they are right, then there is a whole class of counterexamples to community involving acrimonious but worthwhile aesthetic conversations that they claim can be captured by hope. Yeah, okay, I see where he's going with this. There's no reason why hope, that acrimony will help anybody, though. And so it's like, why do you think acrimony is going to lead to any end state? You love shit methods? Okay, are you guys still talking about relativism? Yeah. Okay. The example they discuss at length, and don't worry, there are like a lot of relativists out there. Like, you may not, like, not everyone is going to agree, but like there are definitely relativists out there. Raymond says there's a very good essay that I translated about art where, although it is not so philosophical, gives a good argument about the judgments of beauty and art as practice. Okay, very cool. Valdecasas. All right. Yeah. There is the old book. I had it there a while ago, where it's like art as like where they discuss what art does, and it's like, how does art act upon people? Does it move us? What does it do? Like praxis is usually like how it actually, like, you know, gets people to do stuff. What is the actual work being done? It's like, how is it effective? It's like, yeah, so that should be art should be doing something is the argument, I think. Okay, anyway. Continuing, the example they discuss at length is an infamous exchange between art critic Michael Fried and artist Donald Judd. Fried, or Fried, I don't know, claims that Judd's literalist art is merely interesting and lacks the conviction possessed by art that can hold its own when compared to relevant works whose quality is not in doubt. Judd responds by calling Fried's article stupid, pedantic, pseudo-philosophical analysis that uses shit methods. Oh, that's where you got your shit methods. I didn't see it yet. Judd highlights Fried's misunderstanding of his thinking. Quote, I was especially irked by Fried's ignorant misrepresentation of my use of the word interesting. I obviously use it in a particular way, but Fried reduces it to the cliche, merely interesting, end quote. Hanson and Adams described this conversation as one that community would reject as defective and claim that it is non-defective and a worthwhile aesthetic exchange. However, it is difficult to see how Hanson and Adams' own account construes this as a worthwhile conversation. In the passage they quote from Judd, he is explicitly explaining why he gave up on Michael Fried. He gave up on him because he is a stupid pseudo-philosopher who uses shit methods and is inclined to misrepresent Judd's ideas. These are good reasons to think that there is no hope for them to share attitudes, since you cannot reasonably hope to converge with someone you have given up on. Or if Hanson and Adams think you can, then hope is so normatively weak that it could sanction almost any aesthetic conversation. So it seems that community and hope should agree on the Fried-Judd exchange. The conversation is not worthwhile. Even if Hanson and Adams can show how hope sanctions the exchange, it is clearly a vitriolic extreme, and there could be reasonable disagreement about whether a theory of aesthetic discourse should sanction malicious exchanges full of mutual misunderstanding. It is not the kind of case that should be decisive in selecting between principles like community and hope. I don't know if I agree with this claim of Riggle's, that like vitriolic exchange shouldn't be a paradigmatic example, but you get the point. Why are you using an exchange where one guy's calling the other guy an idiot as an example of something that you're saying is a useful exchange of ideas? Just because it's acrimonious doesn't make it bad, but when the one guy calls the other guy an idiot, then it's like, well, maybe they're not going to agree. Okay. Hanson and Adams' claim is more sweeping anyway. They claim that, quote, expression of contempt are incompatible with vibing. End quote. Expressions of contempt abound in aesthetic life, so if they are incompatible with vibing, then community is in serious trouble. Why think that expressions of contempt are ruled out by community? Hansen and Adams simply quote me to support this claim. Quote, Riggle's commitment to vibing being a feature of non-defective aesthetic conversations leads him to claim that, quote, contempt rarely, if ever, features in aesthetic utterances, end quote. We think this is more than an overly sunny assessment. It strikes us as simply false. Yeah, I mean, artists do tend to be passionate people because, like, philosophy art's hard to do and pull off well, so it's like you have to put a lot of effort into this stuff. Riggle says, this is an unfortunate misreading of what I wrote, using a quotation that is taken out of context. Wow, he hates them. He's like, you guys are just fucking misreading me on purpose, basically. Yeah. So Raymond is arguing judicial ethics deontic logic, which I was just working on. Raymondus already has several divisive guarding stuff. Being murder in self-defense or carrying a knife in public is as if your work tool as a hunter. Yeah. And so, like, we were talking about this earlier. I don't know if you were here, Raymond, but we were saying, like, how, yeah, I think you were, but, like, how we want certain things to just not take out, like, you know, any question or doubt. Like, if you are in this position, you are allowed to have a knife. Like, if you are a chef, you are allowed to carry around chef's knives. Should be obvious. PhD is like, I like how Riggle himself is getting a bit acrimonious now. Yeah, claiming others are. Well, this in philosophical terms is like, this is about as like mean as like a good philosopher will get. Be like, you completely just misread me. This doesn't normally happen because in my experience, calling someone out in this, like calling people out is not very useful actually, unless there's very, very, very good reason to do it. Every time I read a paper, it was actually a very long time ago on Philosophy Roulette, where someone was responding to someone who had called them out, and they ripped that person to shreds. Like someone's like they misread this person's argument, they like kind of dumbed it down, and this person like tore them to pieces. And this is why you try to be a little bit more circumspect or careful, because you don't know everything, and it's like if you're not like really dotting all your I's, crossing all the T's, dotting all the J's, crossing all the F's, you can get torn apart. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is as like kind of like Riggle sticking this to them as much as you can be expected by a competent philosopher, trying to be, you know, professionally courteous, calling it an unfortunate misreading. This is an unfortunate misreading of what I wrote. When I state that, quote, contempt rarely, if ever, features in aesthetic utterances, end quote, I am talking specifically and explicitly about contempt as a candidate for the directive illocutionary force of aesthetic claims. Contemptuous directives like things like die, you horrible cook, or get a life, you fool, quite different from contemptuous aesthetic, are quite different from contemptuous aesthetic judgments. Yeah, so if you're saying someone like fuck off, that is not going to be aesthetically helpful. That makes sense. The quote is from a section entitled, quote, Directive Character and Varieties of Force, end quote, where I survey the varieties of force that might attach to the directive character of everyday aesthetic claims. When one says that something is beautiful to another, they are characterizing the thing as beautiful. But are they doing something else too? Are they directing or encouraging you to do something? Are they recommending it to you, inviting you to appreciate it, or, as Kant thought, demanding your agreement? After surveying several varieties, I rule out contempt as a plausible candidate because it rarely, if ever, features as the directive force of aesthetic utterances. In non-figurative utterances that something is beautiful, one is usually not also communicating a contemptuous directive to the addressee. Yeah, if you're telling someone to fuck off, that's not talking about some other aesthetics usually. I mean, and that, you know, makes some sense. Contemptuous aesthetic evaluations are common in aesthetic discourse, and any theory that ruled contempt out to core would be a non-starter. In fact, community sanctions a broad range of disagreements, and there is no reason to think that something goes haywire whenever contempt rears its head. Yeah, I mean, I'm not watching the Super Bowl right now, but I expect Kendrick Lamar is performing his diss track, Not Like Us, there is contempt in that. Like, he is contemptuous of Drake in that track. He's not like us. That guy's a shitty person. He's not like us. We're good people. So it's like that should be happening right now in front of millions of viewers. Peachtree says, I like the song that thinks aggressively how much I want you to agree with me. Yeah, see, this is the issue. It's like, what exactly is going on when someone says something like that? And so that's the question. It's a separate question. What are you doing when you make an utterance? You could just be enjoying it, and that's part of your enjoyment is to say it. But if you're saying it to someone else, what else is going on there? Okay. But it is important to distinguish between person-directed contempt and belief-directed contempt. Contempt is an emotion that construes its target as beneath consideration, and regarding a person or someone's views in toto as beneath consideration is at best in tension with hoping to form an aesthetic community with them. Fill in the awkward blank. Your aesthetic views are always worthless and beneath my consideration, but let's agree that blank. Why would anyone seek agreement from someone whose views they regard as beneath consideration? Yeah, this is the sort of thing where you get with, it's not racist, but. It's like, why am I listening to you? You're going to be saying something racist. Like, yeah. Perhaps there are cases where it makes sense, but by and large, it doesn't. Similarly awkward, your aesthetic views are worthless and beneath my consideration, but let's vibe over, yeah. Why would anyone want to vibe with someone whose aesthetic views they regard as beneath consideration? Again, perhaps there are cases where it makes sense, but by and large, it doesn't. Hope and community vibe like that. But not all aesthetic conversations involve this kind of blanket dismissal of a person or their views. We might think that someone's judgment in a particular case is beneath consideration, but for that very reason, invite them to see it from another perspective or hope to change their mind. As Siskel used to put to Ebert, quote, you may be an asshole, but you're my asshole, end quote. Contempt, dismissal, hatred, incredulity, they are all familiar enough in aesthetic life and compatible with flourishing aesthetic conversation. And notice also right here, flourishing talk. It gets a little Aristotelian here. This is why our buddy Aris, I think, is in this area. It's like you're trying to build community. He does this better than I do. Aris builds better community. He's trying to have a flourishing conversation. I think he does it better than I do, but then again, this is also his area. So... Again, Riggle's playfulness, another fucking Aris word. My playful emphasis on vibing should not obscure the fact that community sanctions a wide range of aesthetic conversations that are full of friction when that friction is compatible with, and especially when it generates the kind of mutual support Riggle highlights. Preferring and vibing. The most direct way to argue for hope would be to show that the kinds of cases that I highlight to support community over convergence either also support hope or are not in fact worthwhile. For example, I highlight the following conversation as one that community clearly embraces but convergence rejects. The dialogue. S says, that bridge is beautiful. A says, I think it's clunky. S says, the pairs are robust and stately. Exactly right for a bridge, especially that one. A says, perhaps for some, but that bridge is squat and inelegant. S, you tend to hate my hint of Art Deco. A says, you can't get enough of it. S says, I love the fanning shapes, the geometric layering, just beautiful. A says, have you seen the new building on 54th Street? Lots of fanning shapes. S says, I have. I stared at it for 20 minutes the other day. It's fantastic. A says, not nearly as studying as a sleek new library down the block. S says, that thing, it's so boring. Raymond says, there's also the idea of genius. Everyone hates him. No one can get close to the work. He is a misfit. He does not vibe with us. He goes against us. 300 years later, he is loved. I don't like the term genius generally. You can have a conversation with dead people and not the ones not in your community. This is one of the nice things about Twitch. You can find the community that you vibe with. So the people that are local to you may not like you, but you may be in conversation with, like, you know, history or other things. So what do you mean exactly by genius there? I can get that certain people do not vibe with their local community, but then, like, other people in the future or like maybe in a different part of the world will get it. So yeah, I don't love the idea of genius, but like that, just because the local people don't like you, that doesn't always do it. Yeah, our local genius, Viper's gratitude, exactly. So. I used to worry that if I put my work out there, it would get stolen or someone might, scoop my topics. I don't worry about that anymore. No one gives a shit what I work on. Really, very few people give any sort of flying fuck what I do. They're not concerned about this. I hope in the future people will like it. There's a few people that care about me. Not that many. It's like, yeah, I value it. Am I a genius? Probably not. But like the work I do, it's like, who the fuck knows? Peak T says a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and his own home. Yeah. Yeah. So things take time, things take time. And a lot of the work, the ones that get remembered are remembered for a lot of reasons too. It's not always because they were the best. Sometimes that's just kind of, they had the political pull. They had, Galileo was not the best scientist. He wasn't. He did some good things, but he was a very good popularizer of it. And so Galileo gets a lot of credit, but Galileo really wasn't like a great, like other people were doing more important science at the time. So it's like, and oh yeah, Galileo was like the church hated him. He was like a misunderstood genius. No, Galileo was an asshole. The church would have helped him if he wasn't a dickhead to some of the people in the church. And so it's like those that got remembered as like some sort of like scientific genius like Galileo, that's propaganda. Think if you were to take Mertz Bo's book back to 500 BC, it would be hated no matter part of world we took it at the time. Yeah, but also work is of the time. Like anything from nowadays, they would not understand hundreds of years ago. That wouldn't make you a genius. That would just make you of your time. I'm not sure that like corresponds because you're reacting to history. And so the people hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago wouldn't appreciate what we do because they haven't seen all the things we've seen. We're reacting to all of their stuff. If they saw our stuff, they'd be like, we don't get it. But like, I don't see that as a criticism against them. Like they don't like that we're somehow geniuses. No, we've got the benefit of history. We've got the benefit of thousands of years of recorded culture. It's different. Could Bach be considered contextual genius in his own time? I don't know. Like, and that's me being ignorant of enough of the considerations about that peak T. I don't know. And that's straight up ignorance on my part. I just don't have enough background history in that area to have any sensible thing to say. Okay, anyway. So two people who have disagreements can have a fruitful discussion about aesthetics. So Riggle continues, one can imagine the conversation continuing along such lines. Hansen and Adams write, quote, "We submit that this is not an example of an excellent aesthetic conversation, but rather much closer to an exchange of preferences. In this conversation, we primarily learn about the preferences of the interlocutors. Importantly, we don't get much insight into the objects that they're talking about or why their features are or are not aesthetically significant." End quote. This characterization of the dialogue is puzzling in two respects. First, while they say it is closer to a mere exchange of preferences, it is clearly not a mere exchange of preferences. A mere exchange of preferences would look different. Quote, S says, "I like Art Deco bridges." A says, "I'm indifferent. I like sleek modern ones." S says, "Oh, I don't like those." A says, "That's too bad." And S is like, "Go fuck yourself. I'm okay with it." Yeah, and so I don't know these people, Mertzbo and Masana. I spend too much time worrying about arguments and nothing else. Okay, so about that little conversation. Here the interlocutors are simply exchanging information about what they liked and disliked, and this clearly fails to count as an aesthetic conversation. But the dialogue, I guess that'd be the one above, that's about them talking about the Deco bridges, clearly does involve insights into the objects and that they're talking about. The pillars are robust and stately. The bridge is beautiful, fanning shapes. So how is the dialogue closer to mere exchange than it is to genuine aesthetic conversation? And you can see the strategy here. When you don't like something, like Hansen and they don't want to agree with this, they redefine it. They call it an exchange of preferences. So you're just defining certain things as preference exchange as opposed to aesthetic conversation. So it's trying to define yourself out of a problem, and Riggle calls them out on it, and that's the right thing to do. And shows that, like, yeah, but I could define a mere exchange of preferences this way, and that would also be an accurate thing. So the criticism that Hansen and Adams say is technical and not an actual disagreement. You never know. They might like Linkin Park. Okay. Secondly, for the dialogue to be a defective conversation by the lights of hope, it would have to be obvious that the interlocutors do not hope to agree, but nothing rules out the possibility that they hope for some agreement on some things. Indeed, this conversation is far more conducive to convergence than the bitter exchange between Freed and Judd that they claim hope sanctions. To diagnose this second issue, we have to clarify hope. Does it require that the interlocutors hope to agree on everything, on something, on enough things? Consider these variations. Quote, a hold on hope. When we speak with each other about the aesthetic value of an object, we hope that some of our attitudes about the object will converge. And now we've got heaps of hope. When we speak with each other about the aesthetic value of an object, we hope that all of our attitudes about the objects will converge. Okay. The dialogue does not abide by heaps of hope, but isn't that principle a non-starter anyway? Hope is rational only if it is rational to believe that the desired outcome is possible. But aesthetic life is replete with disagreement and variation. Even when talented critics agree that something has aesthetic value, they almost certainly disagree on the details, or all the details. As Hansen and Adams themselves hilariously illustrate, the idea of an ultimate argument settler, a method for determining who, if anyone, is right about any aesthetic disagreement, is absurd. The hope for full disagreement is irrational, or at least very often so, and so heaps of hope is out. Valpo asks, how many hope make a heap? Yes, that's correct. And I think the answer is 3. Yeah. How you doing, Valpo? I hope the semester is going well. Yeah. Alright, so the other horn of this, there are only some things being in agreement. Is that enough? A hold on hope is so weak as to sanction nearly every conversation, including the dialogue. Sure, the interlocutors are not dead set on coming to an agreement, but that is not the only thing interlocutors need to do in order to agree. They also need to understand each other's sensibilities, feel out their respective ways of valuing, gauge their degrees of openness to change, and so on. The interlocutors are at least doing that, and so their actions are compatible with a hold on hope. Yeah, that's because only something needs to agree aesthetically. In that case, hope and community generate the same result. Yeah, 2.3 maybe. Going to send off the next project tomorrow. That will feel kids. What are you feeling kids for? What is that last bit? Feel nice. Autocorrect. Yeah, that was a weird autocorrect there. Oh, well, congratulations on sending it off. I got the second round of R&R back a few days ago, so I have to make a bunch of changes on a paper, and I was able to fix up my paper on deontic logic and existentialism, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. So it's like thumbs up all around. Congratulations on sending off the project. I hope you got to say what you wanted to in that thing, because I remember you asked me about it. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said, more Kierkegaard good, so... You've decided that interlocutors is not a word designed to be spoken. Interlocutors, I say a lot, so it's not that bad. You'd be surprised. Certain writing I get so tripped up on. This one I'm doing not that bad at. Yeah. Okay, continuing on the paper. Yeah, we're reading some Riggle Valpo, so that's always, in general, I like Nick Riggle, so... I think I've disagreed a few times on this stuff, but I'm usually in agreement with Riggle, so, yeah. Yeah, the Kierkegaard section went well. Yeah. Good. People are looking for value in life nowadays, and so we need existentialism more than ever now. So, because if keep hearing like, oh yeah, the LLMs, the AI is going to take over. It's like it can't do this shit yet. When an LLM can have an existential crisis, then we can talk. All right, continuing. This suggests that Hansen and Adams regard a shared hope as necessary but not sufficient for good aesthetic conversation. Indeed, the main argument that Hansen and Adams develop to establish that hope does not sanction the dialogue is that it lacks a property they call seriousness, where a conversation is serious when the interlocutors are ready to argue for the correctness of their aesthetic claims in the face of disagreement. For Cavell, such readiness is part of the discipline of accounting for one's aesthetic judgments, defending one's aesthetic claims, supplying justifying reason, proving one's judgments are correct, arguing against opposing views, and so on. Seriousness is the hallmark of hope because it embodies the means of agreement. You can defend stuff without having it be objective too. You can defend subjective reasonings. Because, like I said, I can defend my like of vanilla over chocolate to some, like, I don't actually care. Like, I like them both. But you could say, like, I like these more than that because, you know, some people don't like the certain flavors. You'd be like, that tastes like this bad thing. And you can say, oh, I can kind of see how it tastes like that, but it doesn't bother me. You can still defend subjective things with reasons without it being like an objective answer. Doger says LMs have millions of existentials of crisis like politics. Are they? Or are they just responding in ways that people do it? Like, until you get like a bender, like a depressed robot, like I don't see the LLMs as depressed at all. I'm sure that they are constantly also saying many very happy things to people at the exact same time. So I don't think they're having any existential crises. PT says, I think your take about the ice cream thing was what I was trying to say earlier with your paragraph. Okay. Glad that we are on some sort of aesthetic agreement. All right. Okay, so what exactly is seriousness in aesthetic discourse and why does it matter? So we need these answers to these questions. Sorry, I just skipped a paragraph. In sharing a hope for agreement is necessary but not sufficient for aesthetic conversation, then hope is significantly understated. What we need are answers to two questions. What exactly is seriousness in aesthetic discourse and why does it matter? Hansen and Adams outline an answer in the first question, but say essentially nothing about the second. Yet the second issue is crucial to their account. Remember, they are developing a process-oriented theory of aesthetic discourse. Process-oriented views need to make sense of the value of the process that discursive norms are designed to promote. State-oriented views do not face this particular problem, since the value of the process is instrumental for the good of the sought-out end state. Again, the teleology. What is the end state? You don't need the process, but if you think there's some good in actually discussing stuff, then you need to talk about what the process is. Waiting for Bender, Samuel Beckett play. Yeah, exactly. But as a part of process-oriented view, hope is supposed to make aesthetic conversation worthwhile in the absence of that end state of agreement, whether or not the interlocutor's attitudes align. So Hansen and Adams have to appeal to something valuable that bears some relation to the process activity that hope promotes in a way that preserves the process-oriented character of the view. This is why a characterization and defense of seriousness matters so much, since it would seem to embody whatever value that is. Make an AI capable of despair, decide morality afterwards. I mean, this is part of the problems and mnemonic. We have no fucking clue what we're doing. We have no good understanding of what like a real consciousness is, and so we may make a very depressed, suicidal AI, and that would be probably a bad thing because then we're just adding pain and suffering to the world, in the name of progress for progress' sake. So it's dangerous. Yeah, I do not wish it's like, this is the sci-fi sort of thing. It's like you're making something that has no ability to change its own life, but it still suffers. Like, that's bad. So yeah. But I'm waiting for that. Like, that would be the singularity. Why is it bad that robots can suffer? Hey, Barraday, how you doing? I think suffering in general is bad, and so I do not, and because I am sort of like, we've really fucked up making claims about humans before and who can and can't suffer. So I am trying to be, epistemically and morally humble, saying that, maybe, these things can suffer, and I think that would be a bad thing. Let's give Baraday a shout out. Baraday is also a philosopher. He's on the extreme far away, well, maybe not extremely opposite side of the spectrum from me. He's doing like the continental shit, talking about the Riz, talking about charisma, talking about, Freud, talking about the psychoanalysis. Is all suffering bad? No. Yeah, we're not that opposite. But you're doing the more continentally stuff. I'm pretty analytic usually. You're pretty sure you conclude that robot will be a slur someday, maybe soon? Yeah, I mean, if there are any sort of conscious robots, then calling it the old name for the unconscious, uncapable ones will probably be, yeah. So no, not all suffering's bad. I mean, if you think that you have to work for stuff, you have to suffer and toil, and then you get the payoff, then that suffering would be good in the sense that it was maybe a necessary struggle. But you might call that something else also. All unnecessary struggle is definitely bad. All unnecessary suffering is bad. But maybe there is a little bit of suffering that goes into a lot of other stuff, and you do it because, well, it's part of the getting shit done. Is it better for a robot to suffer in place of a human being? Well, I mean, that's exactly... Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. But I don't know so. It depends what kind of robot. That's a good question. Cells are interlinked, yeah. I mean, we like to push our work onto machines. And so we like to think that the machines aren't suffering. But if we find out that machines are suffering more than humans doing the same labor, then that might be bad. You're on your lunch break and you're advocating for the devil? Yeah, there you go. That's Blade Runner baseline test, but they're synthetic bioorganisms. Yeah, and so this is the issue. We are trying to make things that take the work off humans to make our lives easier, but if we're putting it on other things and it's worse, that's not good. But yeah, well, I hope your lunch break is going well, at least Barude. Barude talks about, philosophy, politics, charisma, things like that on his stream. He's been reading interesting interesting philosophical texts that I have never gone near, because why would I go near them? But yeah. Doge says, unnecessary suffering can be transformative. My cancer journey is not wholly bad. I appreciate life more. Yeah, but that's fair. And the idea of games, you take on unnecessary burdens to play a game. No one needs to get to the top of a mountain for rock climbing, but people enjoy rock climbing if we're sticking to the aesthetics here. So it's yes, but you can take them on for other reasons. Now, sickness that you have overcome and you appreciate life more, that's I'm sorry that you had a shitty life experience. So but I kind of feel the suffering, suffering is part of life. That particular one is shitty. But yeah, that does make some sense, Dojo. No one should go near the text you read in your Lamau. Yes. Hey, what's up? It all costs money. Yeah. So these are interesting questions. Can you actually get value out of pure suffering? I don't know. Insofar as suffering is a human experience like this, you can make something out of it. It would be better if there were other ways to do it, though. Yeah. Yeah, we're talking aesthetics today also. How do we have aesthetic conversations is really aesthetic discourse. So it's yeah. Only a Nazi cosplay. Yeah, we're getting there in the US. It's kind of annoying. Zenimax says, I think suffering needs a more refined definition. Yeah, that's obvious. I'm fucking it up. Pain doesn't necessarily need to be suffering, with spicy foods. So it seems real suffering would imply some loss of freedom or agency. Yeah, so you can define it if you get nothing good out of it, just suffering for suffering's sake, then it's obviously bad, but that's a very narrow thing. A lot of aspects of our life come with some suffering or pain or whatever, and you can be better for it afterwards. Could you have been better for it without it? But like, it's hard to say. An all cost money is about burning shit down. With the digital age, I don't believe original items hold value. All right, that is a perspective. I feel like history does matter something. And so, like, the objects and their line through history kind of matter. If we destroy it all and just go digital, I feel like we may miss out in the digitalization of everything in the world. I think that would lose out on the materiality of it. There's more information there than we are capturing in the digitalization of it. Yeah. But of course, like books, like there's aesthetics to like paper that you don't get in the digital. But the book can also be described digitally, yeah. So there's more information stored in the physicality of things that we are not capturing digitally. And so I don't think that we should digitalize everything. Peach T says, I feel they are psychologically and phenomenologically different. I agree. You can reprint the book, but then why did you destroy the original? You're just wasting shit. So who cares if the original is lost? Like, we cannot perfectly represent like old paintings. There's more information in them. Like the paint has like thickness. We have to so I went to a museum and they were doing restoring work on part of a famous painting that had been damaged, and they had to sit there with a machine to look at the thickness of some it had been coated in some sort of varnish, and so they were measuring the thickness of the coating of varnish very, very carefully so that when they did the repair work, they could put the varnish on in the right amount. Because, the varnish is going to affect how that part of the painting looks. Even though like the paint they can restore, they need the varnish because that changes how the light refracts. So it's like, we don't have the ability to store all the information without a lot of work. So yeah. Baruti says, still worrying for spawn number 1 to be worth millions, so you vote no on burning originals. Yeah. Peach T says, yeah, I think some analysts don't know all the materials that go into a work of art. Yeah. So there's a lot of information we'd lose, I'd say. Yeah. I mean, the Mona Lisa, that's fair at all costs. Can you see the Mona Lisa anytime you want? Yes. But again, are you seeing all the different aspects of it? Because there is thickness to paint. Like, it's not like it's a perfectly flat painting. And so when you move around a little bit, you can see different things in the paint. It looks different. Peachtree also says, the work of being historical in itself, probably some qualitative aspect to it. Yeah, but that's more of a historical problem. We've actually discussed that here on Philosophy Roulette, where someone was arguing against the history. It says you have to separate out the history, but there's also value to history also, and an aesthetic value to history. So it's like, can we actually destroy something and not destroy the aesthetics of history that come with it? And so you get some weird questions over there. Doja says Georgia O'Keeffe is much different live versus in print. Yeah, sometimes there's scale you don't get. So like the scale you don't get on your phone. Like when certain works of art are huge or very small, you don't get that on your phone. Yeah. So, yeah, we can have the death of... Peach T says we can have the death of the author and the context of the author. Zenimax says, yeah, we can synthesize the sound of a violin, but I also have a 100-year-old fiddle with sweat corrosion on the varnish where modern violins have chin rest. I know that music was played with the fiddle versus synthetic record, changed the aura of the art. Yeah, so there's more things that go into the experience of it. So, yeah. Complicated. But, like, yeah, should we be digitizing everything? Yes. So that more people can have appreciation of it? Yes. Should we be destroying the originals? No. Yeah. But that's the question at all costs money. We can't digitize every violin. Like, it just takes too much time and effort. And, like, so the original still is a storage of the data. It's just a singular storage of the data. If we were able to replicate all the things about it, then we could say, well, we don't need it anymore. But what do you mean, all the things about it? It's very hard to know. All right. Back to the paper. We're getting there. We are getting there. It's almost getting to 3 hours. I'm going to lose my mind soon. All right, as we've seen, Hansen and Adams follow Cavell in characterizing seriousness as a sort of giving and asking for aesthetic reasons. This involves a, quote, readiness to argue for the correctness of one's aesthetic judgments in the face of disagreement, end quote, and making a, quote, sustained attempt to spell out their criticisms of each other's views in detail and defend their own views in the face of disagreement, end quote. Of course, such reasoning will have aesthetic inflection. Hansen and Adams account for this with Cavell's notion of passionate utterances, wherein the speaker expresses their emotions in a way that calls on the hearer to respond in kind and puts the speaker in danger of being rebuffed if they do not. It's a vain, at all costs money says, it's a vain emotional choice and not a rational one in your opinion. Yeah. Again, I think you're losing out on all the information that is stored in the art. So I disagree. It's like, is a digital copy good? Yes. Is the original better? Usually. Okay. Yeah, so you have to be able to defend your aesthetic judgments. So calling on the hearer in this way engages the speaker in discursive moves that are familiar from the literature on art criticism. Yeah, embodiment is a thing. Yep. Exhortations to notice, invitations to appreciate, attempts to guide experience, clarifying commitments, and so on. This implicates the discursive partners in practices of navigating forms of intimacy and alienation involved in attempts to form emotional bonds, share judgments, and align their attitudes. Nevertheless, Hansen and Adams embrace Cavell's thought that serious aesthetic conversations are marked by a certain dogmatism. Cavell writes, I think that air of dogmatism is indeed present in aesthetic claims, but if that is intolerant, that is because tolerance could only mean as in liberals it often does, that the kind of claim in question is not taken seriously. Yeah, digital drums, for example, suck. See, it's like it doesn't capture everything. At all costs money says the original handwritten notes of EMC squared are more valuable than the formula itself. No, but no one thinks so. They like EMC squared, the original notes, for the historical thing, not for its physical value. Of course, we like the physics for the physics. The world would not change, but like if you like the history of physics, it would change. People who appreciate history would be annoyed about that. So, but would the physics change? Of course not. Yeah, so you need to be able to, Cavell is like, you need to be able to justify your claims. That's all. So even if you could T says if you could live in some complete virtual simulation and reality be immersed in it, it would, by the very fact of having some wet work brain, someone being translated into this matrix would probably still be different than hearing a real violin. And that's the old matrix thing. Like, how do the machines know what chicken tastes like? Maybe what chicken tastes like tasty wheat to me. Yeah. Yeah, but there's other considerations just besides the text at all costs money. Yes, the book can be burned, but the book itself has aesthetics to it as well. The text, on the other hand, that has its value separate. But yeah. Yeah, and Barudi says it's oddly to seem actually to matter a lot when books were burned in the past. Yeah, well, there's other implications, like destroying the books when they were the only copy. Viper says you're forgetting that sometimes the medium is the message. Yeah. Yeah. But they're blocking off the internet too, so I mean, keep that in mind, that not everyone has access to the information. Like you might, but that is a good position to be in. Like anyone here that can connect to Twitch has certain access to the internet. Zenimax says replication democratizes art, but the replication without consent lacks aesthetic dimensions. It's the difference between imagining how a song sounds and listening to it on headphones versus a concert. Yeah. But they did have a printing press. Yeah. Yes, exactly. There's a difference between destroying information and destroying the object at all costs money, but you're assuming that the object can be reduced to the information, and we're disagreeing with that. Like, I don't think you can, it's so easy to reduce the object to the data. Alright, continuing. One might wonder how such seriousness and dogmatism square with the openness to change that Hansen and Adams recognize as a valuable feature of aesthetic discourse. By setting up I'm starting to lose it. But setting that question aside, one response to the claim that the dialogue lacks seriousness is simply so much the worse for seriousness. We can have lots of fun, interesting, lovely, dynamic, insightful conversations without responding to the disagreement seriously, that is, by trying to prove our interlocutor should feel the way we do. So why care about seriousness? Hansen and Adams do not explicitly answer this question, but by promoting serious aesthetic conversations, Hope appears to excel at promoting two valuable activities: the activity of coming to share attitudes as guided by the exercise of rational capacities. In doing so, Hope ensures that the aesthetic discursive practices are rational practices because they centrally involve the exercise of rational capacities in the hope of sharing attitudes. In this way, Hope guarantees that our rational capacities have a place in our aesthetic discursive practices. Much ink has been spilled in attempts to support the rationality of aesthetic discourse, and this route is a natural one. Plug rationality directly into the practice by ensuring that individual contributions involve giving and asking for reasons in the hope of sharing attitudes. The worry that motivates their emphasis on seriousness is that conversations that lack seriousness will fall into mere exchanges of preferences. Quote, if vibing only requires recognizing and mutually valuing these sorts of differences without the hope of agreement, it's hard to see how it involves more than the expression and appreciation of personal preferences. Yeah, so this is like, they seem to think Riggle's like, I like it, that's all you're ever saying, and the other person's like, oh, I dislike it. Like, okay, but like, that's not aesthetic. They even go so as far to characterize community-governed conversations as exemplary of what they call the concierge view, according to which the main point of listening attentively to your interlocutor is to figure out what they value and keep the vibing going by making recommendations or discussing topics that they will enjoy, and having them do so the same in return. Yeah, so it's like, I like this, it just means give me more of this. Hansen and Adams see no middle ground between serious aesthetic conversations that embrace a sort of dogmatism and servile expressions and aesthetic and exchanges of preference. Crucially, they write, quote, the inherent discretionary nature of our choices implies that no one could ever seriously contest someone else's preferences. Yeah, and this is like me saying I like vanilla and you saying you were wrong. It's like, no, but I can explain it. Brude says, can you feel the same about people? What if you could be electronically stored on the internet? Is it okay to kill you then? Yeah, a lot of people say yes, though. Peach Tea can vibe with Spotify recommendation algos. But you know how those are made? Like, they know people like you or people who listen to certain music like other music. So it's copying the behaviors. Yeah. And yeah. Holocaust Mind's like, yeah, that's how teleporters in Star Trek work. QED. But again, that's actually getting literally all the data. So that's, in some sense, actually getting all the data. We don't have teleporters yet. So maybe in the future, when we have replicators, it won't matter as much. Okay. But what exactly is this crucial implication? Although I saw a Star Trek movie a while ago, and Captain Picard was visiting his brother and misidentified a wine, and his brother was like, you and your replicators still don't understand what it got it wrong. The replicator had it slightly off because Picard misidentified a wine. So it's like he didn't understand. The replicator was still wrong. Yeah. Heisenberg would like a word. Okay. Oh, that's true. Yeah, there's physical problems. But yeah, in some fantasy land, we might do this. All right. So back to paper. But what exactly is this crucial implication? If someone merely likes something, olive say, then there is no disputing it. This is what I was saying about vanilla. That much is familiar enough. But if the discretionary choice to value something is, well, discretionary, then that would mean that it could be contested. I exercise my discretion. I choose to repeatedly engage in engage in a valuing way with guided by voices instead of REM, even though I believe both are aesthetically good. We could talk about it. I could tell you why. Maybe you will understand even if you are just the opposite. Maybe you can persuade me to go beyond my respect and admiration for REM and become a full-blooded fan, or more of a full-blooded fan. this is what I was saying about metal music. I don't care for metal music. I understand that it has good aesthetic qualities, though, but it just doesn't mean anything to me. Well, Riggle says, maybe I could persuade you. Even if neither of us does, we can have aesthetically worthwhile conversation, talking our way through our connections to our respective musical choices, explaining why we think they are worthy of aesthetic valuing, challenging each other when appropriate. We do not need to hope for convergence in order to support each other in our aesthetic valuing practices for our aesthetic individualities to harmonize. And Alcasmai says, my biggest thing is that burning books used to mean something much more than it does now. I can burn a book and someone else with a cheap Epson printer can knock it out 5 copies in a few hours. That's fair. But I mean, it still clearly has political implications and, even if you're printing it out, it won't be the same quality as, say, like a printed book. Like, having a cheap Epson printer won't make this book. Like, a cheap Epson printer can't print this out. This is a higher quality book. This has aesthetic properties that a cheap Epson printer will not be able to replicate. So there are still values in objects. Dogger says, I think that fuck off can be aesthetically worthwhile conversation. Then again, you're a metalhead. But that's a good counterexample, because fuck off in the metal scene may mean something slightly different. Yeah. Viper says the information landscape has changed. That's why, instead of burning books, MAGA convinces his followers that professors have been indoctrinated into the woke mind virus. Yes, mind viruses are the thing now. The method is different, but the goal is the same: the destruction of our expertise. Yeah. It's like, yeah, just being a dumb fuck is okay nowadays, and it really isn't. Xenomach says, it still makes an aesthetic statement, though. Art is motivated in the process of burning. Becomes an expressive performance that begs the question, why burn this book? Yeah, why waste the energy? It takes effort to burn shit. Okay. So, because we can, motherfucker! Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that just because you can doesn't mean you should. You should have a good reason for doing what you're doing. Otherwise, go do something that does have value to you. Dude, your tone's awful. Thanks, man. Okay, so in Riggle's terms, or for us to vibe. As we noted, I use a technical notion of vibing, but notice that mere exchange does not amount to vibing even intuitively. Now let's see what happens when we augment the mere exchange with some mutual appreciation. So this is mere exchange plus. I like Art Deco buildings. Other guy says, oh, right on. It's a fascinating style, but I never really got into it. I do really love sleek modern ones. First person says, cool, yeah, I can see why, even though I'm not a huge fan, but what do you like about them? A says, I like their sleekness and smoothness, almost futuristic. S says, yeah, I can see that. Funny because I think I like the almost antiquated look of Art Deco bridges. And that's like me in metal music. You can explain it to me and I can get it. I don't care, though. Oh, that's how it's gone in the past. Burning bricks because Canada stopped saying it's natural gas and you're cold. That's a good reason. You're having an all because money is collecting the free Bibles from hotels and having big bonfires. Right on, man. Okay. Adding the mutually valuing of individuality transforms mere exchange into an aesthetic conversation. Clearly, mere exchange plus and the dialogue are not identical, but I claim that they are more similar than the dialogue is to mere exchange. This illuminates how important the mutual valuing of individuality is to aesthetic conversation. Valuing other individuals requires information about individuality. Information about individuality is information about the exercise of aesthetic capacities, discretionary valuing, and volitional openness. Information about the exercise of these capacities is information about what items the individual chooses to engage with and how they engage. Without gleaning that information one way or another, we have little to value. By including it, we gain substantive aesthetic information about the individual. Well, in your youth you did. I ain't got time for that anymore. Fair enough. People are asking me to do stuff a lot. And I'm just like, sorry, dude. The list of things I gotta do at the moment is long. It's like, I don't have time to do all the things people have asked. It's like, yep. Hansen and Adams are right that if a conversation is little more than an exchange of preferences, then it is not a worthwhile pursuit. Hence the fact that people tend not to exchange information about their preferences for no particular reason. Witness the pure comedy of one of my favorite early internet videos, the kid in a zombie costume who says when a live reporter asked him what he thinks about the festival he is attending, "I like turtles." Me too, kid. Me too. Oh, I remember that one. I love LAMP. Exactly, it all costs money. I love LAMP. Community demands more than the mere exchange of preferences, but that alone does not show that community supports a rational discursive practice. What some practices are rational in virtue of, while some practices are rational in virtue of their rational structure. Oh God. While some practices are rational in virtue of their calling on participants to exercise their rational capacities, other practices are rational in virtue of their rational structure. I am really losing it now. Suppose there were some goods that could be attained unless people acted together in a social practice. And suppose that the social practice is such that by following its norms, rules, and conventions, people do indeed realize the value they are after in a way that is acceptable, morally sound, just, efficient enough. Then we can say that the practice is rational, or that we have reason to engage in the practice, a considerable reason if the practice's values are especially good. Okay, this is just discussing amongst yourselves, that's fine. The aesthetic communitarian holds that the aesthetic discursive practices are rational in this way by being rationally structured by the value of aesthetic community. When we aim to realize this value in aesthetic discourse, we might rationally argue and come to value things just as our interlocutor does, bonding over shared attitudes or feelings, but we also might not. There are many ways we might satisfy community. Dogmatism and seriousness can flex their muscle now and then, but they needn't police the affair. We can balance our tendencies to dogmatism with open-mindedness, creative invitation, and a generous willingness to understand, value, and learn from alternative ways of engaging in the practice of aesthetic valuing. Okay. Hopeless community. In a sense, yeah, so this is back to the relativism, but with rationality here. So hopeless community. In a sense, the issue comes down to different ways of understanding the value of aesthetic community and whether or not it requires attempting to share aesthetic attitudes. Hansen and Adams seem to think that there are three options for aesthetic community. The community of serious interlocutors who hope for agreement, the community of individuals who exchange information about their preferences, and the community implied by the concierge view, the happy exchange of well-considered recommendations. It all costs money says, I sincerely hope that all religions find me threatening. I firmly believe religion should be abolished. Yeah, so that's okay. This is one of those religion does not care about you, though, situations. It's like, I do not think about you. Maybe they want to save you, but maybe they don't give a fuck. Okay, it should be clear at this point, contrary to Hansen Adams' portrayal, community adamantly does not embrace the concierge views, happy exchange of recommendations. Recommendations tend to efface the individuality of the speaker. That is why they are appropriate for the role of concierge, who is at the service of the guest. But the mutual expression and uptake of individuality is, by design, the central point of aesthetic discourse governed by community. I argue at length that recommendation is the typical illocutionary force of aesthetic discourse precisely because of its concierge character. Recommendations crowd out the sensibility of the recommender and focus on what the hearer would like. I argue instead that everyday aesthetic claims have the force of an invitation calls on the force of an invitation which calls on the invitee to join them in aesthetic valuing. Yeah, so I say I like this and why? Because I think you will get a similar enjoyment out of it. Okay. Yeah, so you guys can have your religious argument in chat. Yeah, so this makes sense. Like, when we discuss stuff, I want you to see it in my way to see the value I see, because maybe you will then participate in the value. But you need not. There may be other value there that you want me to see that I might appreciate, but then again, I may need not. Good art can be appreciated from more than one perspective, quite often. All right. Riggle says we are left with the choice between community of serious hope and the mere exchange of preferences. Since the latter is no community at all, we seem to be stuck with the community of serious hope. But this is a false dilemma, and we can see it in action in the discussion of dining at a food court with a friend. If you and I go to the Decal Market Hall, you are free to get a Hawaiian poke bowl at Wiki Wiki, while I get a Pakistani burger at BK Johnny, and we can each appreciate each other's choices as expressions of our individual identities. By contrast, Cavell's ideal is illustrated by our going to Jiannan Flushing and agreeing to share Peking duck and steamed barramundi. I kind of want to go to this place. The Decal Market Hall sounds good. These are not our only options. While community certainly encourages sharing and discussing food, we can appreciate its spirit via a third option. We can invite each other to try our favorite dishes. Perhaps one friend says, you have to try the Pakistani burger at BK Johnny. And the other responds, okay, but only if you try a poke bowl from Wiki Wiki. The ensuing aesthetic conversation will focus on exactly the things that community promotes. Hanson and Adams quote Cavell to suggest that arguments can be worthwhile without agreement. Without the hope of agreement, argument would be pointless, but it doesn't follow that without agreement, the argument was pointless. Hope and community both entail that aesthetic arguments without agreement are not pointless. Indeed, as Hanson and Adams point out, failing to achieve shared attitudes can reveal the limits of self-knowledge, but unrealized hopes are always, for that reason, and to that extent, disappointing. That is part of the logic of hope. However, as community shows, aesthetic conversations that fail to achieve agreement are not solely in virtue of that disappointing. They can be wonderful, powerful, lovely, profound, communal, and that is the reason enough to lose hope. Art and the ends of aesthetic life. Despite their party pooping efforts, man, how bad was Riggle? How annoyed was Riggle, and how much joy did Riggle get by calling Hanson Adams party poopers? I mean, in philosophy, you really don't get to call people poopy very much, and Riggle just found a way to do it. This is actually incredibly impressive. Riggle really disagrees with these people, and he got to call them poopy. This is like one of the most impressive things I've seen in a while, actually. You guys don't understand. Like, I know the degenerates that are in the community, and the fact that he got to call someone poopy here is like amazing. Yeah. Despite their party pooping efforts, Hanson and Adams have not killed the vibe. Just like the fact that Riggle can pull off these sentences is so impressive. Yeah, like have not killed the vibe. Yeah. Riggle, Kendrick, yeah. Well, I probably would still take Kendrick, but like Riggle's good. Yeah. Yeah, it's a win in my book. What's up, Combo? Handsome moms love a good poop party? Exactly. I mean, this is just something you don't get to see very often. Okay. Their aim was to establish that, quote, there are vibing conversations that do not go beyond expressions of personal preference, and there are acrimonious aesthetic arguments that community rules out but are still worth having, end quote. But as I've argued, first, the discussion they characterize as close to or as not going beyond an exchange of preferences is no such thing. Second, exchanges of preference are not aesthetic conversations to begin with, and however we characterize the dialogue, their own principle of hope seems to sanction it. Third, hope is not as friendly to acrimonious aesthetic arguments as they suppose, and community is nowhere near as hostile. In responding to their arguments against community, I have developed 3 arguments against hope. First is ambiguous as a sum and all and an all reading, where the former is too weak, the latter is too strong, and in any case insufficiently distinct from convergence. Secondly, it falsely implies that aesthetic conversations that fail to achieve agreement are, in virtue of that, disappointing. Lastly, hope adopts a false individualist thesis, namely that the rationality of aesthetic discursive practices depends on participants exercising rational capacities. Does he get a pass due to a celeb status? Usually not in philosophy, but that's not to say that the editors of Mind Journal didn't know who was writing this when they reviewed it, because they likely had very strong suspicions that Riggle was the one responding to a paper against him, and so they may not actually, they may have given him more of a pass. Maybe not. Okay. We have Vipers arguing against, I think. And what's up, Frank? Yeah, I didn't say hi. I think Vipers is arguing against it all costs money, though. Okay. This question about the rationality of aesthetic discursive practice points to one of the more fundamental differences between aesthetic communitarianism, and this is, I think, something Riggle argues for is called aesthetic communitarianism. You build up an aesthetic community that you are part of. And many of its rivals, process-oriented views hold that the norms of aesthetic discourse issue from the value of certain processes, and so such views need to say what that value is and why it matters. Previously, I've noted two potential sources of process values for hope. In section 4, the process of attempting to share attitudes with its passionate utterances, and the exercises of rational capacities involved in serious exchanges. But exercising rational capacities is not good in itself, and it would seem that the value of attempting to share attitudes is itself dependent on the success and so on some outcome. Both seem to threaten hope's supposed process orientation. So what exactly is the value of the discursive processes of hope? Oh, you're just clarifying? Okay. Sorry, I'm not reading something that looked separate from the discussion in the paper. Yeah. Well, we know Vipers is a bot. We've seen him on video. He's clearly a bot. One answer that Hansen and Adams might develop following Cavell is that serious aesthetic discourse is the process reflects a faith in great art. In an essay on the work of Arthur Danto, Cavell distinguishes between different kinds of aesthetic claim and those that speak with necessity and universality and those that do not. His claims about Warhol's films, for example, do not, but his claims about the Philadelphia story or the works of Beethoven do. Cavell writes, quote, I find that I am not vividly interested in whether others agree with me about Warhol's films, or perhaps no more interested than I would be in whether they understand and like a joke that I like, which may be no small matter. But this is not the role I have counted on from the great arts, which is rather to prepare my experience for judgment by making experience mine, and to show the world, I might say, show the justice of the world to deserve judgment. End quote. Cavell endorses a special category of great art, that it offers some special understanding, ability, or value that prepares us in some way and reveals the world to be worthy of judgment. The rest is just art. On this view, there is some higher good offered by great art and promoted via the process enjoined by hope. And I think Raymond was saying this earlier too, that there's like a common aesthetic and then like some high art. So Raymond seemed like they were in this sort of like philosophy. This higher good, whatever it is, gives aesthetic discourse a kind of solemn or reverential character. Great art stands on a pedestal, and we must rationally consume and hopefully converge to behold it, to love it, and to attune ourselves to its greatness. To do so, we must speak with necessity and universality, exhorting others to share our attitudes. While this might seem to cast aside the view's process orientation, it needn't. The discursive activity enjoined by hope might not merely exemplify, but also constitute the category of great art. But I still wonder, Riggle still wonders whether a Cavellian faith in great art really motivates hope. Community happily accommodates a profound love of aesthetic value without casting art into the role of greatness. A skeptic might see Cavell as leveraging his lack of appreciation for certain aesthetic goods into a sweeping distinction that universalizes the aesthetic goods that feature in his particular life. In doing so, he avoids faithfully engaging with, seeing the greatness in, the work he calls mere art, and communing with those who genuinely love it. Cavell is into modernism. Danto is into postmodernism. Siskel loves Blue Velvet. Ebert doesn't. We are different. And our differences run deep. If we turn away from those differences, then we lose the opportunity to be volitionally open to them and to let our open engagement with them enrich our own individualities. Danto responds to Cavell, quote, the difference between selves, however, parallels their lives, is indelible and intractable. But that does not prevent me from embracing Stanley with a kind of love for his difference, for his depth and brilliance as a thinker, and for the beauty of his soul, end quote. That captures the spirit of aesthetic communitarianism. I reject the picture of aesthetic life as oriented around great objects in favor of an atelic or person-centered communal vision, a vision that welcomes shared attitudes but that also embraces and thrives on differences. Aesthetic community is a good we can realize even when we do not hope for agreement, and it is a good that sees disagreement not as a threat to the existence of great art, but as an opportunity for the kinds of shared inquiry, joint exploration, and cooperative creativity that aesthetic valuing thrives on. The highest good of aesthetic life is the good of being in aesthetic community, the good we socially create and embody when we cultivate supportive relationships in the exercise and improvement of our capacities for discretionary valuing and volitional openness. Aesthetic value is what is worthy of engagement in this pursuit, and so art is subservient to aesthetic community. Art is to be revered because first and foremost we are discretionary and free valuers. While some art deserves a special place in our estimation, we should not lose sight of the fact that art lifts us up to value each other. It is the pedestal we stand on. Alrighty, that took a while, but we got there. Yeah. Drink. Blue velvet makes you uncomfortable. I love it. Blue velvet makes me uncomfortable, and therefore I hate it. There you go. Rhizomatic aesthetics, yeah. Alright, genetic interest is one of those ideas. I wouldn't die for genes, but I might die for liberty, yeah. Okay, and now we're on the emote review. We've done the thing. We got through the paper. And so now if you're new here, you don't know, we review the paper using the emotes. So these are better TTV emotes so you can see them in chat. So if you only see the text in your chat, just copy those texts. Spelling and capitalization matter. Yeah. So yeah, careful there on the pissing off vipers. He bans with impunity. So if you thought this paper had fun ideas and made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. If you thought it had existential or artistic drama, this had artistic drama. Nog Scream. Ouroboros for Nog Oro for the Ouroboros for deep arrangement ideas. Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. Nog Navel for navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global Twitch emotes, vote yay and vote nay, and also my vote meh. Note that all the emotes in the green will make an overall score. It makes it go up if you use the ones in the green. The ones in red make the overall score go down, and the vote meh actually makes everything go towards the middle. So all cost money, gave it a brain dance, a Ouroboros, and a knife, and a scream. So thank you for rating. So yeah, so fun ideas, deep ideas, and some slicing and dicing, and artistic drama. So Peach T Lingo also gave it a Nog Stream. Also, if you double up emotes, that matters to the overall score too. So you can double them up if you want. All cost money, give it a vote yay also. Thank you for rating. I appreciate it. What am I going to say? I mean, we got to give this a Nog Scream. It just is artistic drama. Really is. Nog Scream. We're going to give it 2 for an aesthetics paper. I think I'm in agreement with it all cost money. I thought this is... I like Riggle, unfortunately, so I might have a soft spot for this stuff. I like aesthetics. I'm going to give it a brain dance and a knife also. Nog Knife. So there. Why did yours not go through? Nog Scream. Why is yours not working? That's weird, Dojo. Oh, the comma. I can fix that later. A Riggle Jiggle, yeah. Unfortunately, I should put commas in, yeah. But yeah, so I can fix it later otherwise. But yeah, if you want to fix it yourself, feel free. Zenomox says I agree with most of that. Yeah. The question is, does this have deep arrangement ideas? I don't know if it does. Maybe it does. It's not a bad thought either. Dojo Drummer, thank you for the fix. I appreciate it. Because then I don't have to go back and fix the files later. Yeah, I like Riggle. He does I think in this one... he was defending his position and was kind of a little bit punchy, a little fighty, and I think he did it well. Like I said, he called them party poopers, and that's one of the strongest criticisms I've seen in a philosophy paper in a while, which is very interesting. So yeah, but if anyone else wants to get in on this, feel free now. I feel this is one of the better papers I've read in Mind. Sorry, Mind. But yeah. But again, I do like my aesthetics. I like Riggle in general. So if I'm being too nice on this paper, let me know. But yeah. So despite their party pooping efforts, Hansen and Adams have not killed the vibe. You're just not going to see sentences like that usually in philosophy. Do we have anything else to say? I mean, I'm generally in agreement with this. Like the idea of discussing art, we're not all going to be heading towards some grand answer. A lot of times we're there, I think. Now, are we going to be communitarians about this with Riggle? I don't know. But like a lot of our discussion here is like we make a community for discussing philosophy here on Twitch. That's part of what's going on. Is there like a grand end to this? Well, I make my philosophy roulette. I'm making like an online like review site of philosophy out of this, but that's not like the end goal of like everything I do here. Wouldn't be there. That's fair. Art is important. It is a human necessity. That's a fair argument. Yeah. Tindarius gives it a yay button A. You could just use the vote meh, Tindarius. That does basically the same thing, but thank you for giving the ratings. Combo says sorry you stepped away. You don't have to be sorry, of course. Give it a brain dance just for that party pooping efforts. Yeah, there was fun things going on here. Douglas says, I think that most of my art aesthetic assessments, non-binary, that's fair. I am so ambivalent about things in my life and in the world, like you don't realize. I live in like a gray haze of like my reality is a gray haze. Specifically a necessary, not a necessity. Okay. Well, I don't know what you exactly mean by a necessary then. You're making a punny? Okay. Yeah, so there. Gendero's got the met in. But I mean, that's why I added it, because people were like, I don't want to, like, people wouldn't realize that, like, you could combine a yay and a meh. So they were like, I wanted the meh. It was a shitty pun. It's fair. Peach T says, meh might not signify a passive dismissal, whereas a yay plus nay may mean one really like some aspect, then not some others. Fair. These are rough categories. Like, that's always been a criticism, that, like, I'm not getting it. But also, if you're going to give a rating to these things, you're always going to lose information. Any sort of rating is going to give, is not the original work of art. You're giving a synopsis, a summary in some way. So much high functioning depression going around these days. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Hope you're happy now. Yeah. Yeah. It is what it is. All right. 60 seconds and then we'll get out of here. So if you want to get your rating in, this is the last moment. Holocaust Money says party pooper calling another philosopher shitty. Yeah. Okay. Oh, a fancy poop joke. I didn't get it. Yeah, things are going over my head. I didn't get enough sleep last night. I apologize for my being a dum-dum today.